All right, so TheJewphin. Yesterday, we got to check out a few games from Dotemu, and oh god, it wasn't all Dotemu.
It was all Dotemu.
Yes, I think you're right. I think it was all Dotemu. So we went through three games. We went through Young Souls, which you keep referring to as
Soul Sisters.
Soul Sisters, which it is not.
Even though one of them's a boy.
Young Souls. And then we also saw Windjammers 2 and Streets of Rage 4. So starting with Young Souls, why don't you just, what were your thoughts on Young Soul? I mean, first of all, what is it? We can just tell them what that was.
Well, thank you for the intro, Mithrandiel. So, Soul Sisters, Young Souls.
Yeah.
Young Souls is a game that's very much in the style of Castle Crashers or other side-scrolling beat-em-ups. You play as these two twins. Their house burnt down, and their father disappeared. They went into the basement.
Full Metal Alchemist?
Full Metal Alchemist style. As even go Attack on Titan, they finally made it into the father's basement, and they found a portal that goes to a world that's not necessarily nice. And so through the game, you kind of you find new items, you get new weapons, you have three different things that you're managing: your health, your stamina, and your magic.
Mm-hmm.
And your stamina refills your health
and your weight too,
and your
speed.
Weight.
Yeah, speed too is a big element of that.
As you equip different items, you become heavier, and that makes your attack slower. If you equip the lighter items, you're weaker, but you can attack and move faster. Which it's a cool balance for a game where your entire goal is to move around the screen and not get hit while beating others up.
Right, and we were tweaking that a little bit in our playthrough. So we played through fairly basic, dungeon, castle type level, and at the end faced off against a simian martial artist that flung fireballs with fury, and
wrecked us.
Wrecked us quite badly multiple times. But I think a couple things that stood out for me. I really dug the art style. I think that the visuals on it were really interesting, and I'm a big fan of Castle Crashers, so those elements of having some magic elements and some combat and juggling and combos and that sort of thing, they all, as well as a bit more depth in terms of the armor and inventory, because in Castle Crashers, unless they've changed things recently, it was mainly only with the weapons, right, that you could change out. So there's a bit more depth there with Young Souls, which is good.
Yeah, it felt a lot more like Dragon's Crown or games like that, where you actually have some way to grow your characters. One thing that I thought was really cool, it's only for two-player co-op. It doesn't go beyond 2. It doesn't go to 4 or anything. But one thing that was really interesting is all items are shared between both accounts. So while that does mean that you don't have that fight over, oh, this weapon appeared and I want it because I want to go strong and now you have to go weak. Well, you don't have that fight in picking up the weapon. Only one person can equip one weapon at the same time. So there was a point where I was like, oh, I want this. I want to equip this helmet. This looks awesome. I was like,
but I already had it on.
Mithrandiel, you already have that equipped. You can equip another helmet.
Yeah.
Enjoy that. And that's kind of a cool aspect of just managing one set of resources, but then sharing that set of resources.
Yeah, sure. What were some of your other thoughts on the game besides the aesthetic, the gameplay, anything like that stood out?
Well, it's hard to tell. It looks like there's going to be an interesting progression system. I think what the developer was saying is there's kind of this idea that you go into this portal at night, and then during the day you go into town and you can talk to the residents and you can buy upgrades and things like that. And it's almost like, Persona 3 or Persona 4, and I brought that up, and he said, yeah, there are a lot of similarities to that. But it's a game where you can discover lore as much as you want. When you're in that overworld, you can talk to the people, you can figure out more about the town, you can figure out what's going on and what happened to your father. Or if you just want to, I grab my weapons, I grab my items, and then I dive back in, you can also do that. So I think it's a thing that I've really liked when I've seen in games where they say, you know what, we are going to present all this lore to you, but we're not going to force all the lore onto you. We're only going to make you see what we think is really important to the story. And then everything else is like a thing that you can enjoy discovery of.
Yeah, yeah. So that was a fun intro to the trio of games that we tried out. We then moved on to, well, actually we moved on to Streets of Rage 4 next, but we'll save that one for last. Windjammers 2. So Windjammers 2, if you're not familiar, it's the sequel to Windjammers, which is yes, I know, it's a shocker. Which is basically extreme frisbee. Frisbee foot? No, not frisbee.
It's more like Pong.
It's like Pong and frisbee and super moves and a very 90s aesthetic, and apparently has a very passionate base. Lots of folks who really enjoy Windjammers, and so they're really looking forward to this next entry. What were your thoughts as we kind of went through a few rounds?
I can see why it's got a really passionate base, because it's a game that all of the moves are basically set. Once you've picked your characters, you know what you can do. You can throw the frisbee back and forth, and you can aim it in different ways. Almost like air hockey, but with like a bigger net. But what made it really interesting is the speed at which you could do. In the beginning, it was like Mithrandiel and I, one of us would get it, we'd throw it, and it would just go into the net. Oh, that's the end of that game. Or we'd get it and we'd wait. But it has this mechanic where the faster you pick throw from when you've grabbed the frisbee, the faster and harder you throw it. And you can throw curves onto it. You can, if you block it the right way, you can do super moves. And so we had some matches where it was just like flying back and forth, and each time
the volleys were getting pretty intense. Yeah,
and it was just like you dive for it, you throw it back, and then they dive for it and they throw it back, and it's just like when you get into one of those heated moments, it becomes really fun.
Yeah, it was definitely very addicting, and after the first, I would say that first round was a bit of kind of getting on the bike, but after I say probably the second or third round, I was like, oh, okay, this is dangerous. Like this is pretty addictive gameplay, and again, they've really sort of embraced, and I'm loving seeing more of this. Like we're seeing it with Pizza Titan Ultra and a few other games that we've kind of seen around the show floor in terms of really embracing the 90s aesthetic. And so just like the vibrant colors and the way that the sprites are designed and the stages are made and everything else, which we didn't really get to dive into too much in terms of the different stages. But that was something else they mentioned before we wrapped up with that demo, was that on other levels there will be essentially hazards, environmental hazards that impact the gameplay, whether, strong gusts of wind or, obstacles and things like that. And so definitely curious to see how that would impact future rounds and also the full roster as well, because we only had 2 characters to pick from. Mm-hmm. So I think that will be they're looking to put it out on Switch, I believe they mentioned, which is honestly seeing all these really cool 2-player games coming out for the Switch. Just it's so perfect for the mini Joy-Cons and just being able to take it with you on the go. And so I think a lot of these developers are keeping that in mind.
I think what I've noticed a lot recently is for a while we moved away from couch-based gameplay. We got to this point where every game was an online shooter where you would play from home, someone else would play from their home, and we would just connect over, Xbox Live, PSN, etc. I like seeing this resurgence of couch-based gameplay, but done in such a way that you can dive in. I know I brought up like Dragon's Crown earlier, and there are other games, Diablo 3, which is out on Switch and Xbox, but a lot of those games aren't games that you can dive in. It's like, if somebody's coming over and we're playing those games, well, we're creating characters for that game, we're working through a story together, and while that's good for some situations where you've got
like board game nights. It's like board game nights, right? Like you don't break out Twilight Imperium like for every board game night. Like You've got to have fast games, you've got to have games that have different styles and different ways that you interact with it. You can't just always be into those heavy kind of games.
And you sometimes just need something where it's like, I'm not going to have this person over to my house every single day for the next month.
Right.
But they're here now, and we want to play something. Let's pop in Windjammers. Let's pop in Streets of Rage 4.
Yeah.
Like a game where we can just sit down and they can get into it fast. I think one of the things I found really interesting about Windjammers, while I think there is a high skill ceiling, it's also really easy to get up in terms of skill. Mm-hmm. we found ourselves getting to a point where the things that we were doing looked hard, at least, and were fast-paced on screen.
Right. Yeah. Um, so yeah, speaking of transitioning into Streets of Rage 4, we'll wrap up with that one. So it's been a long time, and since they announced the released the trailer, everyone's just kind of freaking out about it. And we can tell you, based on our playthrough, that if you're a fan of Streets of Rage, you're getting Streets of Rage. And that, I mean, again, it sounds like I'm saying it sarcastically, but I mean that in all seriousness. It absolutely feels and plays like a Streets of Rage game, and even the enemies, the early enemies they were mentioning, they literally have borrowed from the earlier titles. So the foundation of the game is there, and they mentioned, in later stages there will be new versions of enemies, but again, still kind of in the same general style and feel. Now, you didn't seem terribly familiar with Streets of Rage as a franchise before we went into this game. Yeah?
Right. So growing up, I had played other games that were similar. For instance, the X-Men game or the Simpsons game, both of which I think were high-quality arcade games. So I have an understanding of the style of game, but I hadn't really gotten into the genre as much.
Yeah, and it was interesting because, and I think that there will definitely be more of this as the game comes out, especially in the current generation that we're in, where TheJewphin was basically like, okay, so is there like skill progression with this? Like, do we unlock combos? Like, how do we get involved with these characters? Like, how do we evolve these characters over time? And the developer was basically like, no, you basically have everything from the start. Like the punches and kicks and the special moves that you're doing from stage 1, part 1, it's the same all the way through the end. It's just a matter of skill-based combat, and it's a matter of probably a difficulty scale.
Yeah.
That will build in some of the replayability.
Which we kind of also saw in that demo. If you've played any prior Streets of Rage games, you might know that there are these Muay Thai fighters who, when they appeared, they have this charging knee attack that if they do, and at the same time you're doing a jump kick, they're going to take priority and take you out. And so it's one of those things where, I've been practicing every time I see an enemy jumping over and doing a jump kick, but now that's no longer a safe move.
Yeah. Knee always beats the kick.
I did find, and this is one place where I'm contrasting two games that are very different between Young Souls and Streets of Rage, is that in Streets of Rage, I found there was a lot more of that juggle feel to it. I was playing as a character who ends his combo with this uppercut, and if you do the uppercut, and then you jump and jump kick, it'll keep them up in the air. And then you can hit them again while they're in the air and then try and continue this juggling move. And I found that the times that I pulled it off, it reminded me a lot of basically my favorites of Castle Crashers. Because juggling in these types of games where you can just pull off all of these combos without letting people hit the floor can just be hilarious.
Yeah, exactly. And there's the overkill element, but obviously the value of the juggle is for enemies in later games that have much more health. Like, you're not going to have, 2-punch enemies in later stages. You're going to need to be able to juggle them, get them in the air, keep them in the air, and lay on the damage before they get a chance to dish it back. So I would agree. I definitely felt more of that juggling component in Streets of Rage 4, in Streets of Rage 4 than I did in Young Souls.
Now let me ask you one question. How did you feel about the friendly fire?
Yeah, so the friendly fire was interesting in that it would interrupt my attacks, but from what I could tell, it didn't actually damage you.
It does no damage.
It does no damage.
It just messes with you.
It does, in fact. And it was interesting because a few of the times I was in the unfortunate corner of enemies that TheJewphin was pummeling simultaneously. and at some points I just kind of threw my hands up and I was like, well, I'll just let you finish. Like, I'll just, kind of get wailed on here while you finish knocking down the guys that are just happened to be in my path.
And part of that might have been pettiness on my part, because every time I grabbed somebody to throw them, you would just jump kick us both. I was like, no, I had a thing I was doing.
Yeah, exactly. And again, it comes down to that co-op element, and a lot of the if you have friends like I do, a lot of the co-op elements are usually boiled down to why did you grab that health? You don't need it. You messed up my combo. What are you doing? And just general shenanigans, which genuinely adds to the fun and the mayhem. That's again a big part of the reason why Castle Crashers did so well.
Yeah, there was some developer I was talking to earlier who was saying that making a game that allows you to grief your friends was part of the development process, and I feel like that's kind of the same in Streets of Rage 4, where it's even between levels. Maybe every once in a while, one of us would jump kick the other person, and it was like, it doesn't benefit us to do it, but it's nice to know that we can do it.
Yeah, exactly. Just as a reminder that I'm here and I can jump kick you. But yeah, it was a good time spent on those 3 games, and I think of all of them, I'm definitely looking forward to Streets of Rage 4. I'd say if I had to force rank them, I actually would probably do. Gosh, I don't know. Would you have a forced rank on most anticipated? I mean, bottom line is they're all going to be really fun, and they're all going to bring a really cool co-op experience.
Yeah,
and I think they're definitely appealing to different. I mean, Young Souls and Streets of Rage 4 have some overlap, but there's definitely a bit more depth to Young Souls.
But that's the thing between Young Souls and Streets of Rage 4 is that Young Souls is going to be one of those games where you have a friend and you power through a lot of it. Whereas Streets of Rage 4, that's a game where it's like, hey,
you want to beat up some mobsters? Let's go, yeah.
Like, grab a beer, let's dive in.
Yeah, for sure. And I think for that reason, Streets of Rage 4 is probably still top of the list. And honestly, Windjammers 2 is my number 2.
Yeah, Windjammers. I think
Young Souls number 3. Again, not that I'm not looking forward to Young Souls, but compared to the other ones, I think it would be Streets of Rage 4 and Windjammers 2 for that reason of that quick pickup, the mayhem and the fun.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that ranking?
I would not agree with any ranking. I feel it's so hard to compare these completely different games. It's like saying, which Devolver game are you looking forward to most?
Oh, Gato Roboto.
Well, good point.
Yeah, you have not stopped talking about that game since we got here.
It's freaking adorable. It is so adorable. Right. This is not a talk about Devolver, but it's adorable.
All right. Well, yeah, that's about it. We just wanted to kind of share that with you guys and let you know what we tried out yesterday. And thanks again to Dotemu for inviting us over to try them out.
And stay with the Geekly Grind for more information on Streets of Rage 4, Windjammers 2, and Soul Sisters.
Young Souls. Yeah. Talk to you later, guys.